But
that was a good expectation. So that is
Hi, Tim.
does it work? Hi, Andy.
I don't know yet. She said, please dial the number again.
Oh.
The number you have dialed is incorrect.
It's wrong.
And nothing's happening.
Something's happening?
No connection yet. But it hasn't said anything yet.
So Joe talked about the fact that he reiterated.
Aren't you a little close?
What?
And that plunged into the 5 equality.
Definitely nothing is happening.
They seem to be.
Why?
It's an English phone.
There's nothing happening.
What'd you do?
I don't know. I put it in and it said free call.
Oh, lucky you.
What does it say? Put insert and remove. Please lift procedure. Insert payment. Please dial. Next call.
One is they wanted a specific countermeasure
Insert.
documentation.
I have inserted.
Documentation. They feel, I think that they
No, wait a minute. No, something's happening now.
Okay.
Please wait.
And if the documentation has been wrong.
Okay, I'm waiting.
Another
Please dial.
All of the quality data, they want to see that updated again when we get to the review meeting for 131.
Okay.
Do you know the country code to get out of England?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's ringing.
Oh, great.
It's going to be a long movie, Sam.
Yeah, it's okay. We'll cut it out afterwards.
Okay, yes. Roll it back.
Ja.
Hej, så er det Andy. Hej. Jeg står i Heathrow Lufthavn i London. Hvad?
Ja, jeg har også.
Og Tim er der også. Ja. Hvor står du henne? Ja. Hej, det er godt. Hvad siger du? Ja, de har... Nå, det var godt. Så Lisbeth er til møde? Okay, så må du bare hilse. Er hun ikke endnu? Nå, så kan hun snakke. Underviser...
Så er vi kommet ombord på en jumbojet, og den er meget stor. Jeg lige zoome tilbage her.
Jeg sidder her.
Ja, men du kommer. Vi skal lige starte herfra, og så er der biograf, og så hele vejen over. Og der sidder Andy.
Hej, Mathias.
Kan du sige, det er ret stort. Kæmpe stort flyver.
Made the fall of this year. We still do it once in a while.
Did you make that yourself, or?
Yeah, I made a batch with Sylvia here, and we spread them around the thing. And this is a typical syrup. So
Maple syrup.
Making pancakes.
maple, I have some. I'm going to bring out the maple.
Andy, you're right in the way of my
Sorry.
pancakes.
Oh,
That's
you
okay.
gotta see the pancakes.
I'm doing the
I was just wondering
pancakes.
whether they should be turned, you see.
Oh, okay.
Because they've bubbled.
Okay.
Huh?
Well,
Turn the pancakes.
You want me to turn the pancakes?
Bubbling enough?
Yeah, it looked bubbled to me. What do you say?
No, a little more. And you can tip one up and see how dark it looks to. That was the first one drop down. Yeah, a little more. Then you flip them.
Okay.
Oh, here goes the water.
Here goes the water.
Yeah.
Okay.
And now we're going to take the view here.
Well, could it be clogged, you think? You've got some coffee grounds in the
Yeah.
I don't know what you call it, but do you want me to pour some milk in your coffee?
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
No,
Would you like?
you were safer with the battles than you were with the room.
Yeah, I knew what was going on.
Right. That's when Kelly was killed.
What did your family do? What was the business?
Well, her business was, and Uncle Sinya had helped her with that for some time. That's the whole story. So,
Sinya was your mother's brother? No.
no, father's brother.
Your
He was
father's-
the youngest.
So that's your mother's?
Yeah, he was the youngest of, say, the Myers family.
Okay.
There were 3 sons and 1 daughter.
Uh-huh.
This is another story by itself.
Yeah.
The daughter married a dentist from Warsaw, Clara, and they went to live in Warsaw where he had a pharmacy. That's where his family is. So they'd come for visits, you know. And they were pretty safe until World War II broke out, until the Nazis marched in 1939. Well, he didn't want to leave the country when he had the opportunity. See, the Nazi Russian or Soviet pact in 1939. It was a combination of things, partly to buy for time, and there was reason for it. I'm not talking now for support of the revolutionary forces, you know, from 17 on, because that had its own, like every movement of that sort, had its own problems. I wasn't against it, but I knew that there were flaws. By the time in 1939, I knew there were flaws that needed correcting, both from leadership and participation. It needed time. And the Germans, I have a feeling by now that the Germans, the Nazis, planned it very carefully. By the way, shall we make some more?
I'll make them. You?
Sure.
Yeah, I'll make them.
Sure.
Put a little oil on
Okay. Good.
and use that brush to spread it around
Okay.
and turn up the dial there to 350 now.
350.
Then you take give it a couple of minutes.
Mm-hmm.
You take the batter with the dipper there,
Mm-hmm.
and you do about a dipper as you saw me do.
Right.
After you spread that, give it a chance to get hot.
Mm-hmm.
And you can make another 8 pancakes.
Okay.
Oh yes, there's enough for
Yes.
this thing.
So you're talking about the dentist, now, who didn't leave Warsaw?
He didn't want to leave.
Mm-hmm.
He had a different background. He was Jewish, of course. My aunt was Jewish, and they had 2 grown children.
This was
Oh,
Sonia's sister who married the dentist.
Who married the dentist,
Right.
right? And he, the dentist, I can't even remember his family name, felt that he was better off with the cultured Germans. This is what he wrote to Uncle Sonia, who asked him, why don't you get out of there? Because our other uncle that was still in Soviet Union, Uncle Phil, with his wife.
This is Sonia's other brother?
Yes,
Or-
he was the middle son.
Okay.
Was moved with his wife to the Urals, where they worked in factories and did other things, but they were safe from the Germans. This guy wanted to stay in Warsaw because he felt he had more faith in the cultured Germans than in the barbaric Bolsheviks.
Well, it's a historic mistake.
Yeah.
And when they marched in, and for a while it was sort of low-key. So they set up their camps. But when war actually broke out in '41, when they openly attacked the Soviet Union, they were killed, and many others, right in Poland, and Warsaw especially, but all through Poland. The whole family was destroyed. So, you know, such mistakes that people made. It's understandable. And,
Well, you don't know.
I'm not judging their decision because of their lifestyle and where they originated, and they couldn't see it. It takes a long preparation for a response that is for the benefit of the bulk of the people, as we know. So they disappeared. And others, of course. And we had a lot of family up in Leningrad, which is now Petersburg again.
Yeah.
Some of them were killed because my mother came from, the Fishbeins came from the northern part, from St. Petersburg. So like Zenon's family, his father was a nephew of my mother's. He was the son of her brother.
Right.
Yeah.
So there are, of course.
So is Zenon at the generation level that I'm at? No, wait.
No, he's a Fishbein.
Yeah, but I'm talking about generation levels. If you
Generation level, he came later. He and his
He's the same generation as
brother.
you.
Right?
No.
no,
No,
if
he
his
came-
father was
It's the
was
same
their
generation as
nephew,
our parents.
Just about.
Yes.
Just
Must
about.
be.
And they were in Argentina when they left. When they got out of Russia before the war, they got out after the Civil War. Yes.
Earlier than the Meyer, your
Yeah.
father.
No, he got out in 1913 and came here.
Okay.
But by the time they wanted to get out, in about 21, 22, they went to Argentina. It was difficult to get in here. People went there, they went to Mexico and such. Some immigration, you know, not big open immigration, especially Jews. But you remember what happened in the 30s, and a boatload came here, and they wouldn't let them come in. And then they went down to Cuba, and Batista was in charge there at the time, and he wouldn't let them in. They were sent back to Holland, and they all went to concentration camps. That's our record here. To some extent, like Roosevelt did with the blockade of Spain, which was a popular revolt. And the people leading it were elected by the people. And the blockade prevented much of armature and supplies to come in. So it's, you know.
But you were telling us about what the family did in Russia, what their business was.
See, my grandmother was in the dry goods business, and she also sold things that were made locally, like pottery that was made by the peasants. A lot of cooking was done in clay pots, in wood or coal stoves, you know. And that was one. But mainly she dealt with dry goods, linens and such and such and such. And people.
So they were well off.
Yeah. She had a big house. Grandpa Zedemeyer was well off, and everybody had different ideas about things.
Where did he
extended himself too far.
Extended it economically?
Yes.
Yeah.
He got into things that kept him on the move. He liked to travel, and he liked culture. He liked to follow around the performers and people like Shalom Aleichem and others. He was into those things. He was the oldest, so he had more leeway. And I guess his, for lack of direct caretaking, his part of business sort of petered down. So we, mother and we four, lived with my grandmother, and Uncle Sunya lived with us too. He was our youngest, and he got married in the 20s. And before we left, Harold was born.
So which is Sonya's son?
Sonya's and Rose's son.
Rose, did she come to the United States too?
Yes, they came together with her mother as well. And Harold, and on the way here, they spent a couple of years in Romania. Sonia was an architectural engineer, We couldn't get that kind of work, especially during the war years, the revolution years and all that. He, in Romania, he was able, because of his background and knowledge, he was able to teach school for Jewish children.
Mm-hmm.
And there, Sylvia was born, her daughter.
Uh-huh.
And then all four of them came here in about 1923, middle of that. So we already were here. We were able to prepare an apartment for them in the Bronx, and Grandpa helped them with money to open up a laundry, hand laundry, you know. So he did okay. He was responsible, and he didn't give up his cultural connection. He spent all his life talking about and reading. He memorized all of the works of Shalom Aleichem.
Yeah, Sunya.
Sunya.
Yeah, we have a record with him.
Yeah, we do.
And yes, in fact, Tal just made a tape for me for a friend.
Yes.
Who was a musician composer, a friend of Sue's. And when she's in New York, he and his wife visit. I have some of his tapes. So when I told him about Sunya and Shalom Aleichem, he was very excited. He wanted to know. It's his Yiddish is not that broad. But I said, there's enough there to get the flavor of it. And so I have a couple of records that Sunya made. So I have one of them I gave Tal, and he put it on tape, which I'm going to send to this guy. Let him get used to the sound and the feeling, because that's what Sunya had. He had that wonderful way of transmitting the right tone, the occasional laugh that comes in at the appropriate moment, things like that. Well, he was also, he formed his own theater company in the town. Because my
What was the name of the town you lived in?
Krasno.
Krasno. Red.
Krasno is an old historical town. It's the one that was on the road for armies to attack Russia. They come from Europe and across Poland.
Is it still there? Does it exist still?
It's still there, but it's a different functions. I was never there again.
No.
When I had a chance to, I couldn't get in when I was a seaman.
When we went through Poland, we looked for Krasno, and we found it, and we found another, and we found another. There were like 10 or 12 Krasnos in Poland.
Yeah, it means red.
Yeah. So we were kind of, do you know exactly where in Poland it was?
Yes, this is Krasno in the Podolskaya gubernia, which is in the Ukraine.
So it's not Poland.
That one. And
It's in the Ukraine today. It's called Ukraine.
yes, just Ukraine.
Yeah.
Not the Ukrainian Socialist Soviet Republic anymore.
No.
But then it was on the path that armies followed, particularly Napoleon.
Yes.
And the winters are treacherous. That's what got him. The same thing that later got the Nazi army.
Yes.
Got him. And,
Are you one more too?
yeah, just a couple.
A couple?
Yeah. So, coming back to what grandmother did, my grandfather, who was, he was in the, a business that he could do as a Jew, but he couldn't do it for himself openly.
What was his name?
I forget already, you know?
Yeah.
I have to think. I never met him.
That's okay. Your grandfather.
He died when he was about 40 of a stroke. I understand everybody was around the table. I wasn't even born yet. And he liked to sing. He was also a scholar. And he was singing and he gave out. And that was the end of it.
Just collapsed.
Yeah. But what he used to do was he would buy forests for non-Jews in the area so that he would make money.
Yeah.
And he wasn't buying it for himself.
Because Jews weren't allowed to buy.
They weren't allowed to buy.
It was
Had
like
their
that.
own land.
Right. In other words, all this happened before the revolution, before the Civil War. This was still under the Tsar's government. So as I say, I never knew him.
No.
My memory is pretty good.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
largely because such things happen. What do you mean?
Oh,
I'm just gonna look.
oh,
I thought you needed a tool.
No.
yeah, it's a little, that's better. Till the sun goes up some,
Yeah.
then it gets blocked by the overhang.
Okay. Right.
So it's,
Mm-hmm. Okay. And
so all these things went on. And Uncle Phil was in a somewhat similar business, and he also worked with grandmother. His daughter, Yusha, joined the communists, and she was active and an officer in the right through World War II. She was first, you know, with the early armies. She was a youngster.
yeah.
Remember, she was only she was sort of more of an onlooker.
Uh-huh.
She was about what, 11 years old. It's about Ernie's age.
Yeah.
Just about Ernie's age.
Mm-hmm.
But later, she, being a communist, associated with it, and active, she participated in the war, in the army. Many women.
Yeah. Would there still be family in
Yes,
Russia?
Lucia is still, and she has a daughter who by now has at least 2 children.
You got contact with them? You contact?
There was some. It was mostly through Ernie and through Sonia.
Okay.
Uncle Phil and his wife were still alive and
Yeah.
living
And they
in-
lived in Russia.
well, they lived in Ukraine.
Ukraine.
And then they, no, that's fine. And as he got older, you know, and my aunt died, but he was still around a few years. When Ernie and Sylvia visited the Soviet Union,
They did.
it was in 1968.
Mm-hmm.
When we went to Denmark,
Yeah.
Sarah and I,
Yeah.
they had gone there,
Oh.
and they went around the area there.
Uh-huh.
So they were in contact with him, they spent time with him.
Mm-hmm.
But the anti-Semitism within the country had reared up
Yeah.
again. This
Yeah.
is after a revolution, after a
Yeah.
civil war,
Mm-hmm.
after a world war of such
Yeah.
proportions, and the Holocaust and all. Just as a typical illustration, when they left Music to go someplace else, you know, they said goodbye,
Ernie and Sylvia.
Ernie Sylvia.
Yeah.
She came out on the level where her apartment was.
Yeah.
And she was so worked up. I don't care who hears me. She began to sing Yiddish songs.
But it's still there, still
Yeah, 68. So these things, you know, stick in my mind after I did want to visit.
And they still live there now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they're there. And there were Fishbeins still. Many of them were in the, yeah, men and women who were in the army. Their children were in the army during World War II. During the siege of Leningrad, they couldn't get out of anywhere. So many died of starvation and cold.
I can imagine why anybody want to live in Russia now.
Well, now it's wild, and I can't make out really, from what I would hear and read, what the makeup of the, politically, what the makeup of the country is. You hear all kinds of, depending on
No.
which side your brother's buddy. Yeah, there's big changes, big changes. The commercialism, of course, which is not unexpected.
No. All of those countries seem to be starting from scratch anyhow.
See, most people don't know or remember the turn of the century climate of Russia, Tsarist Russia.
Mhm.
There was a tremendous influx at that period, even just before the turn of the century already. The British were working their way in there.
Yeah.
The Tsars welcomed them because it helped them to develop commercialism. For a country that size and with its resources,
Mhm.
they never used it probably.
Mhm.
So the British were, and naturally, as such a country with worldwide connection does, they had a tremendous underground system of spying
Yeah.
that they left there and that functioned. And they were not unhelpful. And at this point, they don't know how high up it went. It could have gone all the way up to the Politburo and such. Because the more you hear, the more you read, the more your mind begins to, like this business about the British saying that they broke the code
Mhm.
before World War II started,
Yeah.
the Nazi German code.
Yeah.
And therefore, they knew about a lot of things to happen.
Yeah.
And I cannot see the Nazis marching in to, after all, they marched like the old armies into the Ukraine and into Lithuania. Both places they had the base. They had the big German population in the Lithuania. And in the Ukraine, they had a lot of anti-Soviet and anti-Semitic groups. With some Germans, but they had their own. And I cannot believe that the British did not have an inkling of that to happen.
They were waiting just to see.
Right.
They're hoping it would.
They were hoping that
They
the
would
attack
destroy
would
each other.
hold them off.
Yeah.
And they were waiting to strike, to destroy each other. When they saw the strength and the ability of the Germans, they felt that they could wipe them out, and they were on the spot to get together.
Well, they talked about it also about the liberation of Germany,
Right?
that the Allies held back and let the Russians
Exactly.
take the main.
The real beginning of that turnaround, and again people forget, was when the French did not honor they had a pact with the Russians, with the Soviet Union, to work together to stop the Germans, not only there, but to stop them from their actions in Spain. The French never honored. And Blum was in, they had a socialist leader, and with a strong socialist and communist party. It's very much like happened in Germany, where the communists and the socialists had a large membership, but couldn't get to work together.
No, the fractionalizing.
Right. With Hitler and with what's his name, the German president, it was an open door for them.
Yeah.
So
Didn't Myers sell sewing machines? I think I've heard that.
he did some there.
Yes,
Yes,
in
yes.
Russia.
He also sold insurance.
Insurance.
Right. And when he came here, he tried to start a stocking manufacturing. It had become a big thing, women's stockings.
Mm-hmm.
It was all by machinery.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously didn't take off.
Was it
So he
nylon
began-
at that point? It wasn't nylon yet.
What?
Nylon didn't exist at that point, did it?
No.
It was
Not yet.
silk or?
Well, there was silk and cotton, but they were all machine made.
Mhm.
That was the new thing. And it didn't go.
Mm-hmm.
And then the big depression set in. We talk about Wall Street, 29. The depression started in the mid-20s.
Yeah.
The downward preparation. So he began to sell dry goods, which he knew from his way back. And Arnie had a lot of friends he made here. First of all, he was a very personable man, and he liked theater, music, so he was always into these things.
Mhm.
Made many friends amongst them, and most of all, he liked to play pinochle.
Pinochle. Er det Ludo?
No, Pinochle is a card game.
That's a card game.
It's a small deck. I don't know how to play it, but it's a reduced...
You know how to play, Aaron?
I never played.
You know.
It's a betting game, right?
Yeah.
It's
I've been
not-
careful, but I never played it. But it's
like
a skillful
poker.
game.
Also,
The
it
game
requires
skill.
more skill than poker.
Right.
Mhm.
Right.
And you reduce the deck in some way. I can't quite
Mhm.
figure out how to do
The family, we stayed together the first few years after we came,
Mhm.
till your mother was born.
Mhm.
We all lived together in the Bronx.
Mhm.
And then your mother, that is, your grandmother and your grandfather were still married.
Mhm.
And he was there.
Mhm.
You're talking about David? No? Or,
Yeah.
no?
David.
With Sipa met under their travels to the United States.
Yeah, well, there was an interesting thing happening. This tells you something about the times.
Mhm.
In the, already, just after the war, and then,
Which war are we talking about?
we're talking about World War I,
Okay.
Mhm.
and the Revolution, and then the Civil War. There were quite a few Jews began to say, well, my mother had been killed, so we felt there was no point in standing to join my father. And they developed a custom here of, the best way to do it was to get a group of people together from a town that wanted to come here. Now this group included Rochel and her sisters and her mother.
So Rochel and Naphtali, Rochel.
Well, it was before Naphtali.
Yeah, but that's the Rochel we're
Yeah,
talking about.
right.
Uh-huh.
Naphtali.
So she lived in the same
She lived in the
village.
same, right.
Okay.
And Dave and his sister had come here before we did. But with our group
His
came,
sister, do you know?
who became an Olshan,
Uh-huh.
and
What was her name?
trying to think
Yeah,
back now.
okay.
Time.
Yeah. Oh, there's a lot of names.
It'll come.
It'll come back.
Yeah, yeah.
I don't push those things because I've learned it comes back by itself if
Exactly.
you don't push it. And
But Dave and his sister had come here
they had
before.
come here about the same time my father came.
Okay.
And they sort of established themselves. His sister got married, they had a couple of children, a couple of girls. Well, 3 actually, young. And it's interesting. The time they came, Harlem was not yet the Harlem of today. It was mostly a white town, and a big part of it was of Jewish people. Those that originally, many of those that came originally lived on the east side. That was the first that came in. And
mean
that
the
was
German-
those that came to New York.
Were
Well,
there
there
German
were
Jews?
Russians,
And Russians?
not too many Germans.
No,
Russians.
Russian Jews, okay.
And many, again, coming back to Lithuania, many of them came from Lithuania and considered themselves Germans. Many of them continue. I have a book here by, have you heard of Nathaniel West? He was a writer in Hollywood, and he wrote some scenarios and many books. Unfortunately, he died about 40, crazy automobile accident. And he was the son of German-Lithuanian extraction. He was born here. His family came here. There were several brothers and my sisters and so on. Well, reading him, you get a picture of what happened here. The Jews in Lithuania were much better off than the rest of what became the Soviet Union. They came here before there was a Soviet. He was born here. And quite a few of them, especially in that grouping, were builders. There were builders there, and they did very well. And they came here shortly at the turn of the century. And they were very welcome because they knew the building trades. They knew how to deal with people. So they built up many buildings on the east side, Lower East Side. And afterwards they sort of moved up. Some went to the Bronx and other places. There was a big building boom here when we came in the early 20s. And a lot of it was in the Bronx. Queens was still a backward place.
Yeah.
People lived in little communities, but it wasn't even, what do you call it? It wasn't yet incorporated into one complete borough. So it was hard to get movement there. There were a lot of areas that were walled in. There were developments, but they were walled in just for the people that got together and did it. In any case, he writes about the Jews who came from that area, and they had they were received better. Everything was open to them in that area. They could, there was no restriction on schools. They didn't have pogroms. They were considered Germans. And, but still, many of them, I guess, felt the handwriting on the wall was there. So they thought, the big opportunity was here. Come, there was much more building going on here, for a complex put up. And that's what they did. And they got very well. So it's all described in this book. You may have heard of one of his, I think it was his first book. It was called, he wrote about Hollywood. It was called Miss Lonely Hearts. His name is Nathaniel West.
Yeah, I think I've heard that.
And then he was a whole string of books that he wrote that in many ways touched the movie industries and other things about life. He was from the left, but never from the left, but not an organized person from the left. He considered himself a communist, a socialist. He believed in the broadening of work and other things to everyone. And, so he got himself killed in an automobile accident with his wife because he was a character. He believed that he was invincible. That's actually what happened.
That's very strange.
It wasn't because he was a bad driver, and so on. So this shows you that here's Ukraine, here's Lithuania, that's Lithuania. And it's like two separate worlds until Soviet Union came.
Oh, they are very different. So you're talking about Dave, they lived in Harlem?
Well, not Dave, his sister.
His sister
lived in Harlem.
Okay.
He lived in another part of Manhattan.
Okay.
You're talking about his role in
Bringing people.
Right.
Yeah, right.
The custom was in those years to send what they called a delegate. There was a society, for instance, from various towns. There was a Krusner Society. That's from Krasno. Jews who had already come here, and they would have events together in winter and holiday time. They'd all read each other, so there was like a base that you would come to. You weren't a stranger. And it was the right way to go because we came, I think there were perhaps as many as 40 people in our group.
From the same
And
village?
we were from the same village, going at the same time, like your grandfather and he was already here, you know, but his brothers and his mother were not.
Okay.
So
When you say my grandfather, is that Dave?
David.
Okay, right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So he was sent as a delegate to bring a bunch of families here. He couldn't go into the Soviet Union anymore at that time. He'd be in trouble. So,
But here, David wasn't from Cosmo.
yes.
He was from Cosmo.
Yes.
Because
His
I have
family-
his mother, though.
Well, his mother may not have been.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, she was buried in Germany, I think.
Could be.
Maybe because she. Well, it's only I have a picture of her gravestone where it's written with Hebrew letters, but in German. But it doesn't say where it is. Okay.
No, she might have made it to one of the German divisions which, before the turn of the century,
Yeah.
were, you know, where Jews went,
Right.
and they were received well.
Right.
It wasn't like in Russia, they left the czars. And there's a whole new history about that available.
Yeah.
It's even
Starting, I think, in the 18th century, or 1700s.
Mhm.
There are many who went there from Holland, Belgium, those that had escaped from France, from Spain
Mhm.
over the years, and others that came up from North Africa.
Mhm.
So there were such. Then they began to, well, that's another story.
Yeah.
But he could go to a central place like Bucharest, Romania.
Mhm.
It was our responsibility to get to Romania and meet with him, and then he'd chaperone us all the way to, in our case, to Belgium,
Mhm.
where we picked up a boat in Antwerp and came to New York.
How did you go to
Now-
Romania?
The way we went is, we had some cousins who lived in Soroki, across the border. You know, Romania was always going back and forth
Uh-huh.
between the Russians and the Eastern countries.
Uh-huh.
And we weren't very far from the border.
Mhm.
The river, the Dniester River, separates Romania from Ukraine.
Okay.
So one night, we were all prepared, we came together, and we were ferried across this river at night.
Because it was illegal, or what?
Because it was illegal.
Okay.
Yes. You had to be very
How-
careful.
Why was it illegal? I mean,
It was illegal to leave the country. They were already had
because it was a
Soviet
social-
government. Yes.
So did you have passports or anything?
No.
No passports.
Nothing.
We got passports in Romania.
How do you do
And
that?
David helped us to get them
Huh.
because we were allowed in because we were escapees.
Mhm.
That was going on quite a bit.
Okay. So for an amount of money, apparently,
Yeah.
you could.
You paid, right. And we were ferried across at night, and we thought we'd all be killed. Here's the middle of the night, and we're on the other side, and they bring us to a house and say, well, stay here, otherwise you will all be killed. Don't leave. But somehow, not all, but a good many of our group, and we were as a group, the four of us, you know, so knowing we had cousins. Some of the others also had some in Soroki over the border, some had to go further. We started off in the middle of the night. We couldn't take anything with us. Fortunately, we had money belts.
Mhm.
Somebody thought about it. Maybe Sunya, you know, as I was told, this is the thing to do.
Mhm.
And they hadn't yet stolen that. They took whatever else we had. We had clothing, flatware, that we took, silverware, you know, things like
Who stole that?
Jewelry.
Who took that?
The people that ferried us across.
They took that.
Yeah, that was part of their
as payments.
business. Well, the payment was in money.
And then they stole that.
They stole everybody's stuff. We just didn't wait around.
And you were sure they were going to kill you also,
Right.
if you
So
stayed.
we and a number of others who also came from the shtetl, I would say there were about 10 or 12 of us from that bigger group. We went together and crossed over, that is, we went into Soroki and went to our cousin's home.
You remember all this?
Well, schlepping along, you know,
Yeah.
there, I'm already about it.
Were you afraid? You remember you were afraid?
I
or-
don't remember that. I remember more important how to find a place where to squat.
Yeah.
You know, everybody had to stop because,
Yeah.
oh, we gotta run into the bushes.
Yeah, right.
And then when we got into town, it was already daytime.
Uh-huh.
And so we found our cousins.
So you walked the whole way.
Yeah, walked the whole way.
But how you say,
Quite a long walk.
some of them didn't leave the house.
Well, some didn't, and we never know what happened to
You
them.
don't know what happened
On the other side, eventually, we met most of the group.
to them. Yes.
But there were others missing, you know, I can't remember them. But they just didn't make it, but I could hear